بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين. اللهم افتح علينا فتوح العارفين ووفقنا توفيق الصالحين وانفعنا اللهم بالقرآن والذكر الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا متقبلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم إنا نسألك خير هذا اليوم فأسعه ونصره ونوره وبركته وهداه، ونعوذ بك من شره وشر ما فيه وشر ما قبله وشر ما بعده، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So as stated during the previous class, today will be the final lesson in the study of Imam Sharafuddin or Nuruddin al-Amariti's Tashir Turuqat bi Nazm al-Baraqat, this versification of Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni's al-Waraqat in the topic of Islamic legal foundations, what is called Usul Al-Fiqh. And this course has been entitled The Roots of Interpretative Disagreement. So this will be the final class for this particular topic for this particular semester. And but that doesn't mean, of course, that Ustad Faraz, his class as well, will continue until he's completed the study of the text. And we started this text during the fall semester of 2014, and it carried over until now. And so it means that coming next week, you won't have to get up so early to come out to study. So today we have a few different sections, and even though it looks like a lot of material to be covered, it's not as much as it actually appears, and for that reason I decided that we would just combine it all into a single lesson. And so the first section we're going to be studying is called Bab Tartib al-Adilla, or at least according to Imam al-Amariti. I believe Imam al-Juwayni, he entitles the chapter Ta'arud al-Adilla, the issue of confliction when proofs conflict with one another, or rather, so Amariti's title is probably more appropriate, which means the order of priority given to evidence, or that is, say, the order of importance that evidence should be given. And so he begins this section by saying, وَقَدِّمُوا مِنَ الْأَدِلَّةِ الْجَلِي عَلَى الْخَفِيِّ بِاعْتِبَارٍ عَمَلِي. The clear proofs are given priority over obscure ones with respect to acts. And so remember, the adilla, or the proofs, they divide into what we call sources and then source indications. Now the sources, as discussed in the original text and borrowed in those particular source chapter titles borrowed by Imam Amariti in this poem, are fundamentally the four basic sources which are considered to be the undisputed sources of the Islamic law according to the Sunnis, Quran, Sunnah, Ijma', and Qiyas. Now, of course, with regard to the scriptural sources, which are Quran and Sunnah, which we have an actual text where you're trying to build a ruling on, that sometimes the text, the language will be explicit or unambiguous, and sometimes it's ambiguous. So when he says that when one is to prefer, or the clear proofs are to be given priority over obscure ones with respect to acts, that fundamentally when you're talking about indications, source indications, yes, what is qat'i is preferred over what is dhanni. If something is clear in terms of its indications, in other words, not clear in terms of an indication, and both of them pertain to the same topic, then naturally you want to prefer the one which is clear over that which is unclear. But what this also means is that when we look at the scriptural sources with regard to their transmission, because sometimes a source will be undisputed in its transmission, we call it mutawatir, and then sometimes it is disputable, we call ahadi. Even if it's a sahih, it is still in that category of ahadi or disputable as evidence that if there's a clash between the two of them, then of course one would go with that which gives us greater certainty than that which gives us lesser certainty. So the jali in terms of indication, or the jali in terms of the transmission, is preferred to the khafi, that which is obscure in terms of its indication and transmission. And then he says, وَقَدِّمُوا مِنْهَا مُفِيدَ الْعِلْمِ عَلَى مُفِيدِ الظَّنِّ أي لِلْحُكْمِ. From among them, priority is given to proofs that result in knowledge over those that result in supposition, that is, with respect to judgment. And realistically, it's almost pretty much a rephrasing of the same issue. Fundamentally, is to say that if it's mutawatir, gives us ilm, it produces 100% certainty, but then something's ahadi, it produces, near certainty, or, just a certain amount of certainty, then that itself is given less preference. So the one of greater certainty is preferred over the one that gives us lesser certainty. إلا مع الخصوص بالعموم فليؤتى بالتخصيص إلى تقديم. So from among them, priority is given to proofs that result in knowledge over those that result in supposition. That is with respect to judgment. That is with respect to the judgment that we deduce from it, except in the case of the specific and the general. The specific should always be taken without the question of priority arising. So if one particular text is a general statement, and then another text, which apparently clashes with it, appears to be excluding a particular from that general category, then in cases like that, we won't discard the particular source that produces lesser certainty, like the khabar ahadi. We won't discard it. Rather, we will continue to work with it, because here we're just talking about a clash between indication as opposed to a clash between the level of certainty of transmission, right? So fundamentally, that's the way that should be dealt with. وَالنُّطْقُ قَدِّمْ عَنْ قِيَاسِهِمْ تَفِي وَقَدِّمُوا جَلِيَّهُ عَلَى الْخَفِي. Give priority to the authoritative text over analogy, and that will suffice. The clear text is given priority over the obscure, right? So here it says, well, what if a text, it clashes with qiyas, a hadith or a ayah of Quran, it clashes with the dictates or the dictates of a legal analogy. Yeah, so being a Shafi'i, both Imam Amriti and Imam Juwaini, in this case, well, then no, qiyas should not be placed before a text from Quran or from the Sunnah. Now, that may not be the case with all of the madhahib. We know that the Hanafis have a particular view, at least the early Hanafis have a particular view about this issue of when a hadith, ahadi, it conflicts with the dictates of qiyas, especially if the sahabi who relates to hadith is not considered to be a jurist. And so in the case like that, according to these early scholars, they would say, well, no, that we get greater certainty from qiyas than we do from this particular hadith, in spite of the integrity, the moral integrity of the sahabi. We still would question their understanding, because often sahaba were, and if not most of the times, they were relating hadith according to meaning. And so if that was the case, then if they're paraphrasing the words of the Prophet ﷺ, then and it goes against what legal analogy or a rational foundation would dictate, then the rational foundation is given greater priority. So and this is one of those issues. So that you find that this particular text is an introductory text, but at the same time, it has its own biases towards the Shafi'i school. So if we were to study this as a much more comprehensive type of study, then we will also be looking at the other sources beyond the four, beyond Quran, Sunnah, Ijma', Qiyas. We'll be talking about istihsan. We were talking about masalih al-musala, sha'r man qablana, urf, shadd al-dhara'i, so all these other qawl sahabi, the other sources that some schools accept and others do not accept. Right. So here's it. So for the Shafi'is, it's very clear, and the Hanbalis as well, that if a qiyas conflicts with a hadith or verse of Quran, then of course, mainly we're talking about hadith. We're not talking about necessarily a verse of Quran, but we're talking about if it clashes with the hadith, then you would prefer act upon the hadith before you utilize analogy. And Imam Ahmed is related that Imam Ahmed would prefer to act on a weak hadith before he actually would take recourse to illegal analogy. وَإِنْ يَكُنْ فِي النُّطْقِ مِنْ كِتَابِ وَسُنَّةٍ تَغْيِيرُ الْإِسْتِصْحَابِ. If there is in the authoritative text something from the Quran or the Sunnah, then the istishab must be changed. That is to say, last week we talked about the issue of the law of presumption. And presumption that certain things may be either haram prior to finding out what if there's a law pertaining to it, or that it's presumptively lawful or presumptively has no ruling according to another opinion, or we make a distinction between ibadat and ma'amalat, or we make a distinction between things that are harmful and things that are beneficial. So if things are harmful, then we presume that they're to be haram. If they're apparently beneficial, then we presume to be lawful. So the law of istishab, presumption, the law of presumption. So fundamentally, what it's saying is to say that if the law of presumption, based upon whatever opinion we have adopted, if that particular understanding, that rational understanding, clashes with a revealed text, then the revealed text will be gain priority over what istishab, the dictates of istishab, or the law of presumption. That's fundamentally what he's saying. And so it's only natural that he mentioned it after mentioning qiyas. So if a text conflicts with qiyas, then we prefer the text. Then the same thing will be said about the law of presumption. فَالنُّطْقُ حُجَّةٌ إِذًا وَإِلَّا فَكُنْ بِالْإِسْتِصْحَابِ مُسْتَدِلًّا. Then the text is decisive in such a case, right, when there's a clash. Otherwise, continue to rely upon istishab, right? So in the absence of a text, then we adopt the law of istishab, the law of presumption. As mentioned before, that in terms of the order of operations, if a person is looking for the judgment of a thing that is not clearly, we're not certain whether or not it's lawful, we would go to the Quran first, then to the Sunnah, then to see if there's a consensus on the issue. And if not, then scholars would exercise their judgment, legal analogy. And if legal analogy still doesn't lead you to the right conclusion, then one would take refuge to the law of presumption. So whatever you accept as the law, the presumptive ruling of the thing, then that becomes the hukm shar'i regarding that issue, according to this particular order of proofs. All right, so that's the first subject we wanted to deal with, is the issue of the priority of the different evidences in Islamic law. And at the beginning, and a couple times after the beginning of the study of this particular text, I've tried to define Usul al-Fiqh and highlight the two pivotal areas of study in Usul al-Fiqh. The first being the sources of Islamic law, and then second, the source indications, we would say, and then some scholars add a third issue, which is the issue of the qualifications of the qualifications necessary for a person to actually exercise independent or autonomous interpretation. And so these last sections fundamentally are related to this final issue. So he begins this next section, or he titles the next section as the chapter concerning the Mufti, the Mustafti, Muqallid, or say the Mufti, the person seeking the fatwa, and the person who adopts fatwa of a scholar, adopt the fatwa of a scholar. So babun fi al-mufti wa-mustafti wa-taqleed. Right, so he begins, he says, وَالشَّرْطُ فِي الْمُفْتِ وَالشَّرْطُ فِي الْمُفْتِ اجْتِهَادٌ وَهُوَ أَنْ يَعْرِفَ مِنْ آيِ الْكِتَابِ وَالسُّنَنِ. Right, so this mufti ijtihadun, so it has a kasra on the ijtihad, and that shouldn't be there, nor should that hamza seat, so it's actually a hamza to wasl here. So washartu fil mufti ijtihadun, washartu fil mufti ijtihadun wahwa an ya'rifa min ay al-kitabi was-sunan. The qualification of the mufti is to have reached the level of ijtihad, which is that he should know the ayahs, meaning the verses of the book, and the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so, like when he's speaking about the mujtahid, or this person, he's referring to the mufti. That the mufti is a reference to the mujtahid. This is a scholar with the qualifications of interpretative autonomy. A person, of course, reaches the absolute mujtahid. For the most part, he's talking about the absolute mujtahid, the person who can, who has the authority and the knowledge to actually offer a judgment or an opinion about any given issue related to the religion. There is a disagreement amongst scholars about whether or not it's possible for a person to have the qualifications for ijtihad in a single issue, right, without being an absolute mujtahid, or do you have to fulfill all of these conditions? At any rate, so he said the first condition, the first of those qualifications, is for one to have knowledge of the verses of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so saying that one has to have knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah doesn't mean that you have to have a comprehensive knowledge of Quran and Sunnah. Rather, it means that with regard to the Quran, that one has to have knowledge of the verses in the Quran which have legal import. Like Imam Ghazali says, there are 500 verses in the Quran that have legal import. But scholars like Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya say, actually, there are only about 150. Al-Qadi Abu Bakr al-Arabi says, well, it's more like 364. So scholars differ about the number of verses in the Quran that have legal import, but one has to have knowledge of those. And so Imam Ghazali actually goes further and say that you don't really even have to have, you have to be able to memorize, have them committed to memory. He says that you just merely need to know where they are and how to find them, how to locate them, you see, and be aware of their existence before you decide to exercise scholarly endeavor, what we call ijtihad. So you have to have knowledge of those particular verses. So you don't have to know the entire Quran. Rather, you have to know those verses that pertain to matters of law, and you don't even need to have them memorized, according to Imam Ghazali. Secondly, with regard to the Sunnah, similar to this, we would say similar to this, is that while the number of hadiths are in the thousands, as we know, and if we count them according to Isnad, they're in the hundreds of thousands, but realistically, they're more a very small number of hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. But those pertaining to law are a similar number, close to about 500 hadith, which pertain to matters of law. And similar to the issue of the Quran, Imam Ghazali says about the Sunnah, know where they can be found, extract them, among other things. Then he says, وَالْفِقْهِ فِي فُرُوعِهِ الشَّوَارِدِ وَكُلٌّ مَا لَهُ مِنَ الْقَوَاعِدِ. And the fiqh in its far-reaching branches and every rule that it has. So have knowledge of the Quran, need to have knowledge of the Sunnah, and then have knowledge of the law with relationship to its particulars, the particulars of law. Now, this condition actually is not one agreed upon by the scholars. That the scholars actually say that, and like Ghazali, he points out, he says, well, to make it a condition that one has a knowledge of all of the particulars of fiqh, that in itself makes no sense, because the particulars of fiqh, they are the result of usul al-fiqh, right? So why would a mujtahid need to have knowledge of all the particulars of fiqh, if fiqh is the byproduct of the process of ijtihad itself? He said, rather, this is nothing more than just the norm. That it is the norm that people, before they reach the point of ijtihad, that they study a number of issues or particulars of fiqh, but it's not in itself a condition for the issue of ijtihad. So have knowledge of fiqh, and then also in every rule that it has, and that is to say, have knowledge of we can call sort of the legal maxims. Again, and that itself somewhat is anachronistic because the legal maxims, they are a byproduct of fiqh, of jurisprudence, you see. So it is really interesting. There's sort of this feedback loop that exists between what can we call the usul al-fiqh, the fiqh, the maxims of fiqh. And even if we think enter into this, the conversation, the matter of the maqasid, of the objective of Islamic law, or the goals and the aims of Islamic law, that usul al-fiqh is looked upon as being like the foundation of all of it. And from usul al-fiqh we get fiqh, jurisprudence, and then from jurisprudence and through inductive survey, we are able to extract maxims from the particulars of fiqh, and then and similar to that, the maqasid, based upon inductive survey of all of these judgments in the Sharia, the revealed law, and in the interpretated law, we get this understanding of the goals and the universals of Islamic law. But then those things that were a byproduct of something else become the foundation, of something else. Once again, so like after time, once all of these maxims and all of these universals, like the ideas of the masalih mu'tabara, the considered interests of Islam, preservation of personal integrity, of religion, among other things, of sanity, wealth, and others, that all of these things which were the byproduct of inductive survey, we call istiqra', they now, when we think of usul al-fiqh or our aims and attempts to actually reach a judgment about a new issue, then we take into consideration not only usul al-fiqh, the Quran, Sunnah, Ijma', Qiyas, and the other sources and the source indications, but we also add to that the universals of Islam, and the legal maxims as well. Even though the universals and legal maxims were a byproduct of a byproduct. So it's like, so legal maxims, so the universals and the legal maxims were only known because of us applying the rules of usul al-fiqh, and we got the rulings of fiqh, right? And then through comparing and contrasting the rulings of fiqh, we were led to discover that these sort of things, likenesses that exist, ashbah wa nadha'ir, and furuq, these different things exist, and then all of a sudden we develop maxims from them. But when people do ijtihad today, then they take into consideration not only the sources and the source indication, but also the universal principles and also the legal maxims, right? So basically, he's saying that we need to know it all, and I don't think that that's an unreasonable demand, but it's for us to understand the difference between the earlier period and the latter period. So it said, وَالشَّرْطُ فِي الْمُفْتِ اجْتِهَادٌ وَهُوَ أَنْ يَعْرِفَ مِنْ آيِ الْكِتَابِ وَالسُّنَنِ وَالْفِقْهِ فِي فُرُوعِهِ الشَّوَارِدِ وَكُلُّ مَا لَهُ مِنَ الْقَوَاعِدِ مَعْ مَا بِهِ مِنَ الْمَذَاهِبِ الَّتِي تَقَرَّرَتْ وَمِنْ خِلَافٍ مُثْبَتِ, together with the opinion of the madahib that have come into existence and the differences established between them. So basically what he means by this is that you have to have knowledge of the Quran, of the Sunnah, and the particulars of fiqh and the legal maxims, but you also have to have knowledge of the points of agreement between the different legal schools, or the points of agreement of the ummah, if we would accept that ijma', right, is truly happened historically, that you have to know all the points of consensus. And in knowing all the points of consensus, the scholar would not pass a judgment which overrides or attempts to override that consensus, because that's a point of danger for this sort of idea of legal theory, that so we need to know if this thing has already been agreed upon, has already been dealt with, because if it's been dealt with, there's no need for us to try to deal with it once again. But we also need to know the points of disagreement. so that we don't claim that there's a consensus in areas where no consensus exists, right? So this is also a condition for the person who is involved with interpretative autonomy. والنحو والأصول مع علم الأدب واللغة التي أتت من العرب. Grammar, the principles of jurisprudence, together with the knowledge of literature and the language which came from the Arabs. Right? So one has to have knowledge as well of grammar, of Arabic grammar, because the Sharia is Arabiya. The Sharia is an Arabic Sharia. The theology, fundamentally, for us to truly understand the differences in theology between the different theological schools, one needs to have knowledge of Arabic in order to get a deep understanding of why they differed realistically. But one has to have knowledge of Arabic grammar, have to have knowledge of Usul. Now I said Usul now, both the Usul of Fiqh and Usul of Aqidah, the Usul of theology and Usul of jurisprudence. Ma ilm al-adab, and it's also in the knowledge of adab, and fundamentally, that doesn't mean that you need to know Kalila wa Dimna and Alf Layla wa Layla and things like that. Fundamentally, really what this means is that one has to understand how words are used contextually. I'll give you an example of that. So the Arabs today, most Arabs, if you ask them what does the word walad means today, they'll say, it means boy. Now, if I take that understanding into the Quran and I find the word walad or olad in the Quran and I think it means boy, then I would think that, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, yusikum Allahu fi oladikum, Allah advises you concerning the inheritance of your children, that it means I'm advising you concerning what your boys should get, right? For example. And so that itself is important to understand that how things are being utilized contextually or historically as well. Understand the evolution of certain words and how they're understood or misunderstood. That's one part of it. But that's probably the most important part of it, you see. So, and often we get that information from studying poetry, among other things. Not that poetry is a requisite for legal extraction. It's not to have knowledge of poetry, but poetry sometimes can give us insights into the proper usage of language, and that's what scholars have utilized in the past. So it doesn't mean that we need to study, even have knowledge of balagha. Rhetoric is not even a condition for ijtihaad, because I don't understand, that this is a nice, beautiful expression doesn't mean that I don't know how to extract the law. You see, or knowing the poetic meters, arud. It's not a condition for ijtihaad. Those are things that are not conditions for ijtihaad. So he's talking about more so of understanding how the Arabs utilize words in context. Like, for instance, this word, this glass, we call it a kats. But once I pour the water out, we don't call it a kats anymore, right? Because a kats or a cup, or glass, that type of cup has to have fluid in it. Without fluid, it's not a kats, right? So we read the Quran, it talks about, uses the word kats. We understand that it's utilized in that sense. And it can be very important in certain situations. So it says, وَالنَّحْوِ وَالْأُصُولِ مَعْ عِلْمَ الْأَدَبِ بِاللُّغَةِ الَّتِي أَتَتْ مِنَ الْعَرَبِ قدرا به يستنبط المسائل بنفسه لمن يكون سائلا. Grammar, the principles of jurisprudence, together with the knowledge of literature and the language which came from the Arabs, in sufficient quantity to be able to deduce matters by himself for whoever asks. So saying to know knowledge of Arabic in sufficient quantity in order to answer the question, fundamentally it means that I do not need to be a grammarian, right, on the level of like a Sibawayh or a Mubarrad or a Farra and Khalil ibn Ahmed Farahidi. I don't need to be on that level of a grammarian in order for me to actually do ijtihaad. Rather, what is important is that I need to know what the words that I'm researching mean, right, according to their proper context, right? That's really fundamentally what he's saying. If we're saying that you are mujtahid, an absolute mujtahid, or you're a limited mujtahid, or a person who does ijtihad with regard to a single matter, a single issue. مع علمه التفسير في الآيات وفي الحديث حالة الرواة. He should also have knowledge of tafsir of the ayat, tafsir or exegesis of the verses of Quran, and in hadith of the status of the narrators, Right. So, and this itself is it's simply a branches out from having knowledge of language to begin with. So far, because the Quran has been revealed in the Arabic language, and in order for me to interpret the Quran, I need to understand those words. And so the tafsir fundamentally is about what we call the mufradat, understand as a fahmul ma'ani, the understanding of words or meanings, the meaning of words in the verses of the Quran, as well as in the hadith. But in addition to understanding the words in the hadith, we need to have knowledge of the condition or the state of the narrators. Right. Now, it doesn't mean that the scholar who does ijtihad has to be a master, hadith master, right? Where you know all the narrators and you can determine whether or not the hadith is sahih or da'if. Now, that is better and best for a person to be of that level. However, scholars say that that it is sufficient for you to rely upon a hadith master's judgments. Like, for instance, Imam Shafi'i, he wasn't a hadith master. Many have said the same thing about Imam Abu Hanifa is more popular. You've perhaps heard people say that before. That Abu Hanifa wasn't a hadith master. He was a hadith scholar. Imam Shafi'i was a hadith scholar, but not a hadith master. And it is related that Imam Shafi'i at times would even go to his student, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and he would say to him, "Let me know if this hadith is sahih or if it's not," right? Before he actually would pass a judgment. But what's important is that we have relative certainty that the hadith is not fabricated or it's not weak, so weak that it can't be, it wouldn't qualify in the area of law. And then he says, وَمَوْضِعَ الْإِجْمَاعِ وَالْخِلَافِ فَعِلْمُ هَذَا الْقَطَرِ فِيهِ كَافِي. And the instances of consensus and disagreement, knowledge of this amount is sufficient for him. So we mentioned this before, as a matter of fact. Right, so here, knowing points of agreement, points of disagreement. ومن شروط السائل المستفتي ألا يكون عالما كالمفتي. The condition of the mustafti, the person asking for a fatwa, is that he not be learned like the mufti. Right, so and this is one of those points of disagreement. Most of the scholars say that if you are a mujtahid, you have the qualifications to have your own opinion or interpret on your own, that you cannot follow the fatwa of another mufti. That you have to give your own fatwa, right? Because you have a responsibility. Knowledge comes with responsibility, and the mufti, when the mufti offers a judgment, the mufti is offering a judgment which fundamentally is his way of saying or her way of saying that this is what I believe Allah says about this issue. Right, and so fundamentally we are trying to uncover something which already exists, the hukum, that's why some scholars say hukm qadim, the khitab Allah, that the hukum is Allah's address, and it's qadim, it is pre-eternal. And so when a mufti passes the judgment, a mufti fundamentally is just simply peeling away at the shell or whatever this. You're brushing away the dust from what is already there, what already existent. And so the mufti has a responsibility to do his or her utmost in order to fulfill his or her obligation or responsibility. So you should not be allowed to follow the fatwa of another mujtahid. ومن شروط السائل المستفتي ألا يكون عالما كمفتي فحيث كان مثله مجتهدا فلا يجوز كونه مقلدا. So whenever he is like the mufti, a mujtahid, then it is not permissible for him to be a muqallid. It's not permissible for the person to just simply follow them uncritically. All right? So next section. The next section, far'un fi taqleed. It continues in the context of uncritical imitation of a scholar. So he begins by saying, تقليدنا قبول قول القائل من غير ذكر حجة للسائل. Our imitation consists of the acceptance of a statement by someone without mentioning the proof to the questioner. وقيل بل قبولنا مقالة مع جهلنا من أين ذاك قال. And it is said, it is our acceptance of his statement despite our ignorance of the basis on which he said it. So here we have two definitions of what we call taqleed, uncritical imitation. The first definition is the acceptance of the statement of a scholar without him or her mentioning their proof. So it's just blind acceptance, right? We don't, ask them, they don't mention it, and we just simply go with whatever they say. The second definition is the acceptance of the statement of a scholar while lacking knowledge of what the proof is, right? While being ignorant of what the proof is. So the first basically says, whether there's a proof, there's not any proof. Doesn't matter. I just simply follow. The second is like, well, I know there's proof, but I don't know what the proof is. But I have trust in the individual. ففي قبول قول طه المصطفى بالحكم تقليد له بلا خفا. In our acceptance of the statement of Taha al-Mustafa, I mean the Prophet ﷺ, there is an imitation of him in the judgment without any doubt. That is to say that taqleed, true blind obedience, is only due to the Prophet ﷺ. That if the Prophet ﷺ tells us something, even if he doesn't give us evidence, he's the proof himself. We do, we listen, we hear, we obey. So taqleed of the Prophet ﷺ doesn't even apply. We don't even call that taqleed. We call taqleed when it applies, when it goes with someone else, but not with regard to the Prophet ﷺ. وقيل لا لأن ما قد قاله جميعه بالوحي قد أتاله. And it is said no, because everything that he said was by means of revelation. So that's to say that one opinion is that we call it taqleed, even with regard to the Prophet. Others say, well, no, we don't call it taqleed because everything the Prophet ﷺ did was wahi, or that is to say that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Najm, وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيُ يُوحَىٰ, that he does not speak from whim or out of desire, it is only revelation inspired. That fundamentally is talking about when the Prophet relates something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of the Quran. So beyond that, we would say that, when we follow his opinion of something he says, it's his taqleed, because sometimes the Prophet did ijtihaad according to that opinion. Others say, well, no, we don't characterize it that way, regardless. So taqleed, as we know, is an issue, is what we say that this is what non-specialists do in the absence of the qualifications to do ijtihaad or carry out scholarly endeavor or practice interpretative autonomy. Then we do taqleed, that we accept, we follow, we uncritically do so, meaning that we accept it without knowing or fully understanding what the evidence might be for it, as long as the individual is said to be trustworthy in their character, or believed to be trustworthy in their character and in their knowledge. And then the final section, concerning ijtihaad, before we open things up, it says, وَحَدُّهُ أَنْ يَبْذُلَ الَّذِي اجْتَهَدَ. And again, that the hamza on the ijtihad shouldn't be there, because this is a wasl. وَحَدُّهُ أَنْ يَبْذُلَ الَّذِي اجْتَهَدَ مَشْهُودَهُ فِي نَيْلِ أَمْرٍ قَدْ قَصَدَ. Its definition is that the one who engages in ijtihad should exert his effort in attaining a matter he intended. So like ijtihad is to exert your utmost effort in order to arrive at the judgment you believe to be the one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to a given issue. So a person has to exhaust all efforts. And if you don't, then you're sinful. وَيَنْقَسِمْ إِلَى صَوَابٍ وَخَطَأٍ وَقِيلَ فِي الْفُرُوعِ يَمْنَعُ الْخَطَأ. And it is divided into correct and erroneous. And error is forbidden in branches where certainty exists. So like an ijtihad can be a mistake, and it could be correct. So there are two basic opinions historically that we find amongst scholars. There are two particular factions. One faction, we can call them the sort of the relativist faction, which they used to say that kullu mujtahidin musib, every mujtahid is correct. So this is somewhat we can say it was an acceptance that the truth can be more than one. This idea that truth can be more than one. So any judgment offered by any mujtahid is valid to act upon and to follow and to imitate. The other opinion was we can call the group the absolutist position, who said that al-haqqu wahid, that the truth is one. There's only one truth. وَلَا يَتَعَيَّن. But we can't determine exactly which one that is. Right? So they weren't absolutists. It was like, well, yeah, we don't know for certain because Allah doesn't talk to anybody, but there's only one truth. And this is realistically the position that most scholars have taken historically, was the position that there is one truth, right? Even if that truth is that there are two possible answers to one issue, there's still only one truth. And that even if so, there are two possible answers, but that is a single truth. So Sahaba who Banu Qurayza, they're told that they don't pray Asr until you reach Banu Qurayza. Some of them prayed before the sun set, before they got there. Others wait until they got there. The Prophet heard about it. He said, okay, no problem, fine. He didn't reprimand anybody. Those people, they said the Prophet, and he said that he didn't mean that we should miss Asr. That's what the first group said. So they prayed before they got to Banu Qurayza, the village. Others say, well, the Prophet said, don't pray until we get there. They took him literally. So when they got there, they prayed after sunset, during the time of Maghrib. So there are two different possibilities. And the Prophet didn't reprimand anyway, so there's a possibility that there can be two valid positions to a single issue. But the second group was like, the truth is one, but we can't say which one is the absolutely more correct one. So it says, it's divided into correct and erroneous, and error is forbidden in branches where certainty exists. That is to say, when he said in areas where certainty exists, that error is impermissible, he's talking about matters of theology. This is fundamentally what we're talking about. That, matters of certainty, that theology, the tenets of faith have to be established by definitive proofs, by undisputable transmission. And so this is fundamentally what he's talking about. وفي أصول الدين ذا الوجه امتنع. Again, same problem. Get rid of the Hamza. Hamza to wasl. وفي أصول الدين ذا الوجه امتنع إذ فيه تصويب لأرباب البدع. And in the principles of deen, that is of theology, then it is the same way forbidden, because it would imply approval of the people of innovation. It would imply that if khilaf is permissible in matters of theology, then a lot of people's understanding of God will be correct on that basis. من النصارى حيث من النصارى حيث كفءا ثلثوا, that should be ثلثوا. من النصارى حيث كفرا من النصارى حيث كفرا ثلثوا وزعمون أنهم لم يبعثوا. Such as the Christians who committed kufr with their Trinitarianism, those who claim that they would not be resurrected, and those who claim they would not be resurrected. Right. So some people say with resurrection, there's no life after death. So if ijtihaad in those areas are valid and tolerable, then hey, well, it's just ijtihaad. So everybody, has their own truth. It relates to the afterlife, it relates to God. أو لا يرون ربهم بالعين كذا المجوس في ادعاء again that Hamza again, just messing it up. Get rid of the Hamza. كذا المجوس في ادعاء الأصلين. في ادعاء الأصلين. You just combine it. Not في ادعاء. في ادعاء الأصلين. كذا المجوس في ادعاء الأصلين. Or that they will not be or they will not see their Lord with their eyes, and the Zoroastrians in their claim of the two principles, that is dualism. So the first issue of like those who say that we won't see God in the hereafter, they're like the Mu'tazila. That was their position that they took. So if we say that ijtihad is permissible in theology, then that would be also something we validate people's beliefs about God. And similar to that, the Zoroastrians who believe in the two principles, that is to say that life, that darkness and light are the two principles of existence, and when they came together, this is the basis of creation. That creation came about on the basis of that, this dualism. وَمَنْ أَصَابَ فِي الْفُرُوعِ يُعْطَى أجرين وجعل نصفه من أخطأ. I believe it should be أجرين with sukoon. وجعل نصفه أجرين جعل نصفه من أخطأ. Maybe the wow shouldn't be there. أجرين جعل نصفه من أخطأ. Yeah, I believe that. The wow is probably a mistake. I can check it later. وَمَنْ أَصَابَ فِي الْعُرُوعِ يُعْطَى أجرين جعل نصفه من أخطأ. And whoever attained a correct result in the branches is given 2 rewards, and make half of that for the one who is in error. That is to say that when the scholar practices this scholarly endeavor, that and is correct, meaning that the judgment is in accord with the divine knowledge, the divine wisdom, then the person receives 2 rewards for that. But if the person is incorrect, the person receives only a single reward, and that is because of the ijtihad. Right? Allah doesn't punish or consider it sinful for that person is qualified to do so, but because it did not conform with the divine knowledge, it is the reward is not multiplied. لما رووا عن النبي الهادي في ذاك من تقسيم الاجتهاد. Because of what has been narrated from the guiding prophet concerning the 2 types of ijtihad. That is to say that this understanding is based upon the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, إذا اجتهد الحاكم فأصاب فله أجران وإذا اجتهد فأخطأ فله أجر. That whenever the wise person or the judge or governor gives a judgment or exercises ijtihad and is correct, receives 2 rewards, and if incorrect, receives only 1. And is the hadith that the Sunnis accept. Of course, the Shia don't accept the hadith. It's valid. At any rate, then he goes on and say in concluding his the poem, وَتَمَّ نَظْمُ هَذِهِ الْمُقَدِّمَةِ أَبْيَاتُهَا فِي الْعَدِّ دُرًّا مُحْكَمًا في عام طاه ثم ضاء ثم فاء ثاني ربيع شهر وضع المصطفى. And with this then the versification of this introduction has been completed. Its verses and number correspond to firm pearls. This was completed in the year 989 Hijrah, in the 2nd day of the month of Rabi' al-Thani, the month of birth of Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So like this the issue of the rumuz, the symbols or the abbreviations pertain to a certain science, the science of Jumal, where you can actually where the letters represent certain numbers. So that's a different discussion altogether. Or the science of Tarqim, which also numerology is something which was studied by many scholars as well. And then finally he says, فَالْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ عَلَى إِسْمَامِهِ ثُمَّ صَلَاةُ اللَّهِ مَعْ سَلَامِهِ عَلَى نَبِي وَآلِهِ وَصَحْبِهِ وَحِزْبِهِ وَكُلِّ مُؤْمِنٍ بِهِ. Praise be to Allah for His completion, then blessings of Allah and His peace upon the Prophet, his family, his companions, and his followers, and every believer in him. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. All right, so questions, comments? Yes, tfaddal. Yes, yeah. See, it's not a true relativism. You understand? Sin is and it's also like not a true absolutism, because there are always groups that are excluded from consideration. You see, so if you're not a Muslim, right from the start. Second of all, if you're considered to be a heretical group, right? If you're not an acceptable group, then what your Mujtahidun say has no meaning. You see, and this is something that was the way that it was dealt with historically. A lot of sectarianism. Now, the further back you go, the more open things were. But as time went by, the more insular the community became. And to the point that if you find, for instance, an issue comes up and the Shia have their Mujtahidun and they differ with the Sunni Mujtahidun, the Sunnis will say, well, who cares what they have to say? There's ijma'. This is the point of consensus, and what they have to say about this issue doesn't mean anything. Right? Yeah.
How can someone be relativist when, like, if they accept, like, God exists and there's objective reality, that there is only one truth, although we might not know. Like, I'm having a hard time how someone could fall into the Sunnah and all that by being this relativist, although it might not be the relativism that we see today, but, like,
Yeah.
how they can say that there is more than one truth.
Well, this is more like legal relativism. This is legal. This is not theological relativism. I mean, there are no relativists in theology.
But
Right.
give us some examples that kind of unpack that. I'm just trying to I'm having a hard time processing how they think about that, how they go about it.
Well, I mean, fundamentally, like if you're talking about an issue that comes up, let's say the matter of whether or not vomiting breaks your wudu, right? So relativists, in the sense, they say, well, okay, though I disagree with you about vomiting breaking one's wudu, I'm fine with your position, and I consider it to be valid according to your principles. And it's okay for you to hold that position and for people to follow you. You follow me? So it's legal relativism. We're talking about matters of praxis. Yeah.
Allah gives down a ruling, and his knowledge of that ruling, isn't there only one right or wrong? Although that might be a legitimate opinion,
Uh-huh.
but wouldn't they be wrong technically? One opinion is wrong.
Well, I mean, again, that depends on your perspective. I mean, because again, it's just you just have these two different views. It's like one position being that there's more than one truth. You know, there's more than one right answer. Put it like that. It's another way to put it. There's more than one right answer to that question. You see, it's not just black or white. Yeah. Whereas the others say, well, no, there's only one right answer to that question. It's kind of like math, right? 1 + 1 has to equal 2, right? You know, it's math. The other one's like, well, no, this is like philosophy, or so unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has spoken to us directly, we can't behave as if he has, right? So I mean, relativism today is what we're talking about, like moral relativism, where you're talking about how, listen, if I, probably one of the most popular areas is like sexuality. It's one of those most popular areas. It's like, well, I mean, this is where I live. It's that is an alternative lifestyle. For men to be as men and women to be as women, among other things. And if you have an issue with that, even though often we're badgered because Muslims might have an issue with that, and other religious people might have an issue with that, we're badgered, right, because of it. But there's always this talk about, everyone has their own truth. They have their own sort of, morality, and you have no right to condemn or others for the way that they live. They choose to live. But it's more politicized. So what we're talking about in this area of study, something less political than it's some politics involved with it, but it's less political than what we're dealing with today. Because of the dynamics of power. The power relationships between people. Right. Yeah.
The two opinions, from our vista, both of them can be correct.
Yeah, exactly. That both opinions historically have been like deemed to be like acceptable, even though most scholars have taken the view that there's only one truth. Yes. Yeah. Somebody had a question over here? Yes, Yusuf. Right, but this in terms of definitions. The first definition was just it's literally blind following, where I just follow you because of who you are. You understand? And I can care less about what you have to say. I mean, what the basis of your opinion is. You see, because I love you so much that I'm just going to go with you. You see. And this, in one level, that can turn into a very negative thing, because, like as Abdullah ibn Mas'ud's reports have said, he said, "La yuqallidana ahadukum dinahu rajula." Let none of you make their deen the subject of the blind following of any man. فَإِنْ آمَنَ آمَنَ وَإِنْ كَفَرَ كَفَرَ. If that person believes or achieves iman, you'll do so as well. But if they achieve kufr, you're also going to go and achieve kufr, right? So that first definition, gives the impression that in itself is an acceptable type of taqleed, you see. So that's why the second definition becomes more important. Is say, well, that it is to follow or accept the statement of a person without knowing, right, their evidence for it. So that's an assumption that there is evidence. Where in the first definition, there's not an assumption that there is evidence. It's just simply blind following. Right? So like for us, we're committed to the second as opposed to the first. You see, that our assumptions are that the imams, the four imams and others, they had evidence for their positions, right? And it wasn't just, okay, I feel today, I'm just going to, I think this, right? Yeah, I think that, if a person is just simply, following an imam and doesn't know if the imam have evidence and or can't determine it, I guess you would say, what the imam's evidence is for their particular position, and one just, is, if you are presented with the challenge of a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in a situation like that, and there's no information about what your imam's position was on that hadith, but in spite of it all, you go with his opinion, then I think that's more in lines with the first definition of taqleed, and it opens. I think the person is subject to some level of condemnation in a situation like that. On the other hand, if it's simply a matter of I want to check to see, and I'm not going to move on the issue yet until I find out for certain, and then I discover that the imam did have knowledge of the hadith and did not, and gave it an interpretation, or they felt that there was something that overrided the hadith, indication of the hadith, because of a principle that he had adhered to, then in that case, there's no problem. You can go with the imam on that issue, you see, because the early community, they dealt with the weighing of certainties. So a hadith was just simply a source, one one source of the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. It wasn't the source of the Sunnah. It was a source of the Sunnah, But in cases where it would, as long as it wasn't clashing with any other possible source of the Sunnah or the knowledge of Islam. So if the Mujtahid is the individual who just was unaware of the evidence, if that's the case, then the imams, the students of the imam, the adherents of the different schools, they all were able to highlight those things. If the imams didn't have knowledge, and so that's why the schools are just simply like not just a collection of opinions by the founders or the school's eponyms. It's not just that; it's their schools. Over time they've been refined and looked at over and over, and scholars have attempted to try to discern the bases for the different scholars' opinions. And often the members of the school departs from the opinions of the imams on a number of issues as well. Like for instance, Imam Malik preferred that we pray 39 rakats of Taraweeh, but the Malikis say 23. So it's like, the Maliki Madhab is 23. He was like, well, the Imam Malik didn't say that, so how's it the Maliki Madhab? But it's like, well, he said this is what he should have said. It's kind of like what they're saying. It's like he should have said this. He was supposed to say that, because his principles are this, and is what we understand it to be. And so if it's a mujtahid, then we'll usually know that. We'll discover that through studying the readings of the later scholars in the madhab. Mm-hmm. All right. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I have a question from online.
Mm-hmm.
Brother Anwar asks, I have heard that argumentation is discouraged in our deen. Can you expand on this relative to reasons for difference of opinion? I suppose there is a specific adab. And then part two of his question is, I suppose difference of opinion is among scholars anyway, but just curious if the Sheikh has a comment on argumentation and difference of opinion.
Well, I mean, there are two types of argumentation. There's one type of argumentation when it's based upon a lack of knowledge, and other argumentation is based upon knowledge. So of course, if you don't have knowledge, you shouldn't be arguing. And often people don't have knowledge, and they're arguing about different things, and so that would be prohibited. But even if you have knowledge, at times, what is prohibited is what we call al-mira' fi din, which is violent dispute in the religion, where you find one person is not listening to the other. We just want to just make our point, get it across, things like that. But argumentation, which is what we say is just another word for debate, scholarly debate, then that's totally different. There's nothing wrong with that, But where it becomes a problem is when the people's their intentions are to sort of magnify themselves, their nefs, their egos get involved, and they're just simply trying to win the argument, and they're not willing to at least listen to the other person's argument, and so then that becomes a problem, And so when that happens, you just sort of bail out when you realize that people are not going to at least entertain what you're trying to say. And of course, sometimes there can be more than one reason why they don't do that. Sometimes people may not entertain what you say because perhaps you're arguing with a knowledgeable person. An ignorant person arguing with a knowledgeable person, and so the person who lacks the knowledge, refuses to give in or listen, I guess you would say. So that's the way I would answer that particular question. Is there another? Mm-hmm.
Someone also asked if Zaytuna or yourself plan on teaching any other Usul texts in the future that you...
Well, I mean, that's something we definitely it's been on my mind, but we haven't really discussed it formally yet, but it would be definitely nice to teach on some other texts. But we utilize this text partially because it is what we call a perennial text. It is something which has been studied for centuries in many different parts of the Muslim world. And also because there's a translation that accompanies it, Dr. Hatsam's translation. A lot of the other works that I would like to teach on, don't have a translation so that the audience could really benefit from it in the way that we would hope that they could. So, I have a personal interest in teaching one Maliki text, Kitab al-Irshadat of Imam al-Baji, was a Maliki text, which, I think the Arabic is very simple, simplified, and, but then also some other, from other schools. Miftah al-Usul is another book that I think is an important book for people to study. So inshallah, make dua. Is there anything else? Okay. My on-site audience, anyone? All right. So, go ahead. No problem.
In these days, are there people who can make ijtihad?
Well, that question, it comes up a lot about if there are people in these days that make ijtihad or can make ijtihad. It troubles me at times that people would ask that question, because regardless of whether or not there are people, people continue to do so anyway. And in the absence of, if we believe that they don't exist, then what do we do in the absence of those people? The Shia have a position that there's always the Mujtahid, in every single generation. The Mujtahid is always alive. That's why you have people like, for instance, Ayatollah Sistani and other people. You have their local scholars who consider to be their Mujtahideen. And also that they believe you cannot follow the Ijtihaad of a dead Mujtahid. That's actually another position that they take. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal had a similar opinion, to that, where he believed that, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not allow a generation to exist without a living Mujtahid. And he based it upon, among many things, one hadith where it says, "La tazalu ta'ifatu min ummati al-haqqi zahirin," that a faction of my ummah will continue to be victorious upon the truth. But then you take into consideration the fact that there's different types of mujtahideen. There's the absolute mujtahid, which many of the Sunni scholars are of the view that don't exist anymore. But the qualified, the non-absolute mujtahids likely have existed throughout history. I remember a student had asked one of my sheikhs, and he said that لا يخلو زمان من دعوى الاجتهاد, that no time exists free of the claim of ijtihad. And he wasn't saying that there were mujtahideen. He just said that there are always going to be people claiming ijtihad in any given generation. But then we can also add to this the idea, if we don't have absolute mujtahideen, and we don't have mujtahids who actually exist in the different madhabs, there's the idea of the mujtahid in a mas'ala, in a single issue, a single matter. And Imam Ghazali, among many other scholars, accept the possibilities of their people. If you might not have the ability to do ijtihad in everything, but you can have the ability, a qualification to do ijtihad in a single issue. So that's primarily what I would say exists today. And people do ijtihad all the time, as people they try not to claim that that's what they're doing, but fundamentally that's what we're doing. We have all type of issues, like, the issue of moon sighting as one example, that the way that we deal with moon sighting today is totally a novel way that we deal with moon sighting for both people who support the naked eye sighting and those who do calculation. That all of them, both positions are a form of new type of ijtihad. And I can mention a number of issues, but I don't want to get into that because we're really already over time. But I think what more importantly is that it's simply the question of, are we going to, if we believe that there are none, are we going to continue to work towards trying to become those people? You see, and I think that's what's more important, realistically. Why study Usul al-Fiqh? Why study mantiq, logic? Why study all these different things if we're simply expected to just simply repeat what people said in the past? No, we study these things so that we can deal with new issues. We can face the realities wherein we live, and that's just the way things are, in my opinion. But so I would say that's all, folks. It's Bugs. What's that? Elmer Fudd, right? So this would be the final lesson in the this particular series, as mentioned. You had another question there. I mean, it's up to you. I mean, we're over time. I can, Okay, go ahead. What you say? You're gonna try to do what?
Let me try to get this.
Okay.
This one. Okay, Sister Lena says, we live in a homogeneous society. We are, quote, programmed to think this way. I am trying to break this trend, but what are the absolutes we go to, if you were to sum it up in a way that, what we can go back to and remember to go back to?
I don't know. The answer is going to be too long. It's not enough time to answer that question.
Yeah, that's pretty big.
Say it again.
Well, I'll try. I said that's a pretty big one. It's
a pretty big question. Yeah, it's gonna,
she sounds like she's kind of looking for, okay, what's that bottom line of some type of principle or concept that maybe we could.
That's sort of characteristic of commoners, that we want the black and white, and the nature of this class is that it's kind of like to kind of remove that type of thinking realistically, so I can understand when people are like, well, what is this guy all about? He keeps talking about this opinion, that opinion, and this opinion, well, just tell me what the answer is, what the truth is. And, and people take it as a sign of like non-committal. It's like, no, it's not non-committal. It's just about trying to get people just to see diversity that's there, and understand why we differ, and then if we understand why we differ, then hopefully we can avoid differing violently. You see, and that's just the way that I approach things. I give people different opinions about things, and instead of just telling people, "No, this is what you're supposed to do," I'm just not that type of person. I tell people, "Listen, at the end, understand the opinion, understand the basis of that opinion." And then at the end of the day, istafti qalbak, take a fatwa from your heart, that you let your conscience determine where you're going to go with that. You see, because you're not going to come back later and blame me for the mistakes that you made and say, the Mufti gave me this answer, and if I didn't listen to him, he was, I wouldn't have, my life wouldn't be all messed up. No, I just don't do that. It was a time where I was inclining in that direction, but I don't do that anymore. And, but this is the nature of this level of study, you see. But of course, there are ways that you can get some sense of stability, I guess, in your life. That if a person is looking for stability in terms of their praxis, you just adopt the school of law. You should, have knowledge of the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. You should study the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. And you're always, anytime you're in times of confusion about matters of law and things that are happening in politics and society, then we look back at the example of the Prophet ﷺ, see what he did, what he didn't do. And then Islamic history, understand Islamic history, engage the Quran, connect with the Quran, develop a relationship with the Quran. That the Quran, there are things in the Quran, of course, that the average person can't interpret, but there are many different things in there that any person can understand. That you can get and better understanding than I could. There are all these stories, there are proverbs, there are similitudes all throughout the Quran, that any person reading them can actually gain great wisdom. And I think if you cling to those things, the Quran, the example of the Prophet ﷺ, that you can adopt a established legal school, for you to practice for your worship, then a lot of simplicity, I think, will come into our lives. And in the meantime, we continue to try to increase our knowledge of Islam, of the Arabic language, and among other things. Yeah. Was that it? What did you say, Yusuf? Was
the dress black and blue or white and blue?
I don't know. It looked black and blue to me. The dress. Yeah. So as mentioned before, that's all, folks. And inshallah, we'll have more of this coming later. For those of you who are interested in reviewing the earlier lessons from this particular series, you can do that by simply becoming a member of our 12,000 strong campaign. By donating, something as little as $30 a month, you can become a member of Zaytuna. You have access to all these recordings, not just these classes, but other classes. I wasn't asked to do that. I just wanted to let people know that, listen, that's the way that you can get access to it. It's $30 a month. That's it. More would be nice, but get access to all of it, inshallah. So see you all later. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد آله وصحبه وسلم.